Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Steve Basics Guide, where we'll be going over some of his stances and basic strategies. I'll note again that we are now on Tekken 7 version 3.33, so we're now even closer to the big Season 4 balance patch, so be on the lookout for videos that discuss changes to the characters we've done guides for, including Steve. Although some things will definitely change, the expectation is that characters will still play generally the same, and this is even more true when we talk about strategies as opposed to specific move details. I also neglected to mention in part 1 that there is a written version of this guide if you ever need it, just like with all the other character basics guides. Link to that is in the description below. So with all of that out of the way, let's chat about some Steve strategies. This video is going to have two main sections, and this first section we're going to focus on Steve's stances. Because our goal here is to focus on strategy, you'll notice that we're not going to do a move-by-move breakdown of the stances. Instead, we're going to talk about the general application of each with some examples, and then try to put it all together. So first, let's start with sway. It's a fairly simple evasive stance that ducks backwards. It only has 3 moves. Sway 1, which is a safe, quick power mid with low risk. Sway 2, which is your risky big read option since it can give a launch if you catch a whiff. Just be careful because of how far back the hitbox is on it. It's very much intended to punish forward hitting moves. If you whiff it, they have all day to punish you. Lastly, Sway 1+2 is a quick grab that's useful for repositioning and can shove your opponent into the wall for a free follow-up. Sway 1 is definitely the most used option because of how low risk it is relative to the reward you get, but on wall stages, definitely keep the grab in mind if you notice your opponent has trouble with them, unless you're just feeling ballsy, and then you can keep doing Sway 2. Weave is another evasive stance, this time moving to the sides. 3 is your left weave and 4 is your right weave. It's most common to transition into flicker from left weave 1, which is very safe and gives huge plus frames if the left weave 1 lands. Otherwise, you'll see people go for broke with the counter hit strings, which are left weave 2-1 and right weave 1-2. Right weave 2 can give big damage at the wall as well, since it's also a wall bounce. The same goes for left weave 1-1, which is a natural combo and will just wall splat straight up. Left weave 2 and right weave 1 can also transition into peekaboo, which are both -1 to +1 on block or massive +8 to +10 on hit. Regardless, weave is important simply because of how strong being able to move to the sides is in Tekken, and weave also ducks Steve down a little bit, so not only are you moving to the side, you're lowering your hitbox as well. Next, let's talk about another fairly simple stance, Albatross. It's incredibly useful for getting in quickly, which is its primary use. Albatross 2 is a quick, safe mid and typically the most used option since the low Albatross down 2 is so slow. Albatross 2 can also wall splat. You can do a second spin away or transition to peekaboo, although going that route is useful for timing mix-ups if you think your opponent will play defense. Both of those options pair well with just doing an empty Albatross to get yourself in their face. But in general, you'll snag a lot of people with Albatross 2 simply because it moves so far, so fast. So you'll catch people a lot when they're just trying to move around. Watch any Steve at any level and you'll see what I mean. Duck is evasive in the same way as sway, but now you're moving forward. It's incredibly common to sneak under a high and catch a counter hit with duck forward 2, which you can link into another duck as many times as you want, or catch your opponent with a duck 1. Extended duck, which is done simply by holding forward in one of the kicks, allows for more offensive pressure since it buffs all of the normal duck moves, most notably extended duck forward 2. Extended duck forward 2 into another duck is +15 on block. Since there's no low from the stance, this is how you get people to crouch. The most common 2 follow-ups are extended duck forward 2 into another duck forward 2, which is very easy, or extended duck forward 2 into another duck, then cancel that duck with down back into an instant while standing 1-2, which is hard but worth practicing. If they crouch, extended duck 1 gives a free forward 2 or dash down forward 1+2, or if you catch a counter hit with either regular duck 1 or extended duck 1, you'll get yourself a juggle. If you want to play real ballsy, you can do duck 2, which is a pure mid launcher, but it's very evasive against highs if your opponent is jab happy. Regardless, duck is a strong stance for baiting counter hits or applying block pressure with the extended duck once you get them playing defense. Just remember how many essential moves we mentioned that can go into duck. Peekaboo is a more pure offensive stance that revolves around string pressure and annoying people with peekaboo down 1 to get them to duck or hit buttons. To that end, Peekaboo 2 is a quick, safe homing move that eats up jabs, so it's a very common follow-up after Peekaboo down 1 since it'll eat up anything when you're at +3. Peekaboo up forward 2 is your big read option. It's launch punishable, but it crushes both highs and lows. Peekaboo down 2 is another high crushing option that will launch on counter hit, so you can catch people trying to jab out or do a quick counter hit move like Magic 4. Peekaboo down forward 2 is a safer mid launcher at -10, just be careful with the range and the tracking on it. Otherwise, you'll see a lot of people doing both the Peekaboo down forward 1 and back 1 strings to catch counter hits or use the mental frames for other setups. Note that most Peekaboo moves leave him in Peekaboo afterwards, but you can cancel the stance with down back. Also, most of his other stances and many neutral moves have ways to transition into Peekaboo, many of them potentially with big plus frames, so be mindful of those when you encounter them, as that means easy counter buttons offense. One example we already mentioned was left weave 2 and right weave 1. If either of those hit and you transition to Peekaboo, your opponent can't even move, otherwise you're going to nail them with something from Peekaboo. Lastly, we'll talk about the granddaddy stance, Flicker. Oddly, there aren't a ton of moves you can do from it, but the options are so strong and everything in it is safe. It's just 3 things mostly: the Flicker 1 string, Flicker 2, and Flicker back 2. Flicker 1+2 does exist and it's a grab, but it's the only grab he can do from the stance, so if you're playing someone who's even a little decent at breaking grabs, you're not going to get a ton of mileage out of it, so we're not going to really address that. In any case, Flicker back 2 is simply a high PC, although it is safe, and it can wall splat for big damage, so once your opponent gets to the wall, they really have to watch their buttons against Flicker pressure. Flicker 2 is a mid that knocks down and offers a free grounded hit if it connects, or a launch if you nab a counter hit. But Flicker 1, which is I-12, is where you're really going to see rewards. He can do up to 3 of those quick jabs, which is Flicker 111, all of them jail, so you can't duck them, and he can loop back into Flicker and even go into Albatross off of any of them. So yes, if you want, you can do Flicker 1 as many times as you want, just keep holding back to keep going back into Flicker. He can also end any of these punches with the same mid as Flicker 2 by simply pressing 2, which creates a nasty timing mix-up game. Really, that's what it all boils down to, because keep in mind that just like Peekaboo or Duck, you can cancel Flicker by pressing down back. You might have noticed by now that we haven't mentioned a low out of Flicker. He doesn't have one, but he really doesn't need one. The idea is to keep your opponent locked down so much that eventually they become impatient and run into a counter hit or just whiff. Now, if you think you'll get your counter hit, Flicker 1 forward 1, Flicker 1 down 1, and Flicker 1-2 are all natural combos on counter hit. Flicker 1 forward 1 and Flicker 1 down 1 can both be delayed for another brutal timing mix-up. Consider this: if you whiff Flicker 1 but you land forward 1, it offers the same situation as Flicker 2. If you whiff Flicker 1 and do the down 1 option, you actually get a tailspin juggle for really nice damage. If you're using Flicker well, you'll notice that doing Flicker 1 delay down 1 catches a lot because all of his Flicker strings are really hard to interrupt. It's extremely common to see the second hit of Flicker 1 down 1 connect on people trying to duck punish Flicker 1. It's also 0 on block, which sets up for more shenanigans. Now that we've gone over Steve's stances, be mindful that what makes these stances so powerful is how you can flow through them. For the most part, you can neutral transition in and out of every stance at will. For example, if you go into Flicker, rather than doing a move, you can go into duck, weave, sway, or peekaboo. As mentioned, you can also flat out cancel stances with down back. This is a nightmare scenario for your opponent because even if you're at negative, you still have evasive options to ruin their day. Considering how often you'll go into a stance like Flicker, this concept is very important. In other words, Steve is the quintessential mental frames character, meaning that while your opponent is deciding whether they think you're going to finish a string or do a stance transition, you have already moved on to your next option. This dynamic creates perfect counter hit traps. So for the second part of this video, we're going to do something that's a little odd for the basics guides, and that is we're going to discuss briefly a pretty broad and general topic, baiting. But it's important to stress that Steve's entire move list hovers in the -4 to +4 range, give or take, so he's the ultimate setup character, particularly with all of the stance transitions. The idea is to force your opponent to use faster, less rewarding moves like jabs, or kill them with counter hits when they don't, and even sometimes still kill them with counter hits when they do. Now we won't go through everything, but I want to give you a handful of examples to get your creative juices flowing. First, doing practically anything into while standing 1-2 can be a solid option. Again, this is one of the best while standing punishers in the game, so once they start getting jab or high happy to challenge your stuff, start whipping this out. For example, if you notice them challenging back 1 flicker, cancel the flicker, watch for the whiff, and then throw your while standing 1-2. Or do something more simple like down forward 1 duck, again, watch for the whiff, and then while standing 1-2. It's not complicated, but you'd be surprised how effective it is. Also keep in mind that you can just throw out while standing 1 because while standing 1-2 can be delayed. Next, consider any situation where you are at advantage into a back 1 follow-up. The risk versus reward on back 1 is absolutely absurd, so even something like blocked jab into back 1 will beat anything slower than I-12, and even then, you will get a lot of favorable trades. Basically, if it's not a magic 4, your back 1 is going to net you serious damage. Since it can also go into flicker, even on block, you're right back into pressure. Now here's something a little more specific, down to 1 into duck. The duck here will go under high, so this is an example of using that evasion we were talking about in the stance section. So particularly good for people trying to mash jabs to get out of your pressure. And remember, down to 1-2 is unbeatable, although risky, if they're challenging with mids. Flicker back 2 is a great power crush, and there are so many setups for it. It's important to keep in mind that a lot of flicker transitions are not plus on block, so you'll still see savvy players trying to challenge it or trying to make a read that you won't do the flicker transition. 1 down 1 into flicker is a good bait example for this. 1 down 1 is 0 on block if you go to flicker, so very few moves in the game will outright beat flicker back 2. Now keep in mind, single jabs are really good against power crushes, so if you run into really smart players that are doing that, remember your stance cancel into while standing 1-2 training. If anything, you can use flicker back 2 to try to bait people into jabbing or doing something else so that you can set up while standing 1-2s or other counter hits. It's very, very meta. Down forward 1+2 creates another very specific example. On hit, if you just wait, get up kicks will whiff and you can punish with whatever you want. It's very simple and straightforward, but very effective against players trying to predict your dash pressure with get up kicks. Remember that you can use evasion in creative ways. In this case, sidestepping before doing a weave creates extra lateral movement. Because the weave happens late, you have a lot of time to input a shoulder confirm, for example, sidestep left, left weave, then watch and wait, and press 2 if there's an opening. Lastly, we'll give a shout out to timing mix-ups. We mentioned several of these in stances, but again, just play with the timing of your moves. We mentioned while standing 1-2, but delay things when you can. Try to be real unpredictable with finishing strings and the like. Flicker 1 timings are probably most popular since, again, you can loop flicker 1, and flicker 1 down 1 gives a really beefy counter hit juggle, as does flicker 2. And of course, flicker 1 forward 1 gives a knockdown on counter hit. So do whatever you can to entice your opponent to swing at you. Thanks for watching part 2 of our Steve Basics Guide. I know when you're just starting out with a character that trying to find a flow and find effective strategies can seem daunting, but hopefully we gave you some ideas here to get you going. In the next part, part 3, we'll go over punishers and juggles to round out your gameplay. We'll also give you some players to watch so you can see all of this stuff in action, and then we'll cap it off with a character summary. So as always, be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube. I also try to stream whenever I can, so link to Twitch is down there too, as well as Twitter and Facebook page links if you prefer those. Lastly, consideration for the Patreon is greatly appreciated. Patreon is definitely the best way to support your favorite content creators. Regardless, we hope you're enjoying the content, and we'll see you guys next time.